Hello, my name is Darryl Robert Schoon, and we are in the midst of the 2012 presidential election run. And in the next two programs, this program and the following one, I want to put what is happening today in another context. And to do so, I want to enlarge the frame of what we're going through right now. And perhaps by seeing it from this other framework, you'll be able to understand really what's going on in a way that you never did before. Well, first of all, I'd like to take you to a lot further back. What this is about is money and power. Politics is really the study of change. And Shakespeare once said, "To be or not to be, that is the question." And for the purpose of these next two programs, I want to frame that question in another framework. And the question then becomes to change or not to change. And to understand the nature of the change that's going on, you have to understand what's at stake. All of us in 2012 feel that something really big is going on. But we don't know what it is. I mean, anybody you talk to will give you their opinion. But generally, we know that something's up, that we're on the verge of a big change, whatever it is. And it's bigger than any of us even suspect. And that's why I want to enlarge the context of the discussion today. When I was in Munich this March, a couple months ago, I gave a talk at the New School for Austrian Economics. And as a part of that talk, I tried to put because it was about economics and of the financial crisis that's going on right today. And that's part of what's happening, because part of the shift today has to do with money, part of the shift today has to do with power, and part of the shift today has to do with us. Now, to understand what's at stake, you have to understand what is changing right now. And what's changing is money and power. 300 years ago, we had this tremendous shift that happened in the world. At that time, the world was composed basically of the East, China, Japan, Indonesia, Korea, the East, all right? And it was very, very separated from what we call the West. These are two distinct worlds. In the West, you had England, the continent, blah, blah, blah. You had the, South America, North America, and which is a distinct reality from what was going on in the East. And what happened was going to affect both the East and the West. Because what happened in the West was going to not only transform the West, but it was ultimately going to transform the East. The East is yin, as opposed to the West yang. And in that framework, yin and yang means male positive, positive negative, action, inaction, outer and inner. All right? And of those two elements, the two polarities that create the universe itself, the West was the active force, represented the active force. The yin represented the eastern force, introspective, meditation, inward states of consciousness. The West was action, outer realm, movement. All right? And until 300 years ago, these two consciousnesses were pretty much separate. All right? They're pretty much separate. They didn't interact at all. But what was going to happen in the West was going to change everything. And really what it was the rise of capitalism. The rise of banking, modern banking in England in 1694. In 1694, something happened that would transform the world. And what happened then was a Scotsman, William Paterson, approached the King of England, and King William III. And he approached him with a deal. And he said, if you let us issue paper money from my new bank that I've got an idea of, I'm going to call it the Bank of England, if you allow us to issue paper money alongside the gold and silver coins that are used as money, I will pay off all your war debts and loan you more money so you can go to war again. Now, here's the King of England. This man has power. I mean, a lot of power. But he didn't have much money. Why? Because like most kings, he was fighting wars constantly. And King William III seemed to like wars more than most. So when William Patterson approached him with this deal, he was in debt from his previous wars of trying to conquer Europe, France, whatever it was. All right. So when William Patterson, the Scotsman, approached King William with the deal, with an offer that if you let him issue paper money from the Bank of England, he would pay off his debts. This was a deal that the King of England did not and could not refuse. His acceptance of that deal was going to change the entire world. Now, before he did this, paper money had made an earlier appearance. In the West, it had never been seen before. But in the East, in China, 691 years before, essentially, paper money had made its appearance. 1000 AD. Approximately 1,000 years ago in China, paper money made its first appearance in the world. And how it came to be is really interesting, because people wouldn't give up what they had for a piece of paper. That's a promise to pay, all right? And, you know, it's like if your neighbor says, listen, I want to buy your house, and you go, great. And in your house, you know, is worth approximately $250,000. And your neighbor goes, listen, I'm going to give you an IOU, a piece of paper. And you go, listen, I'm not going to sell you my house. I can get $250,000 for it. Why am I going to give it to you for this piece of paper? Well, which is an IOU, all right? This is how paper money got introduced into the world. Because paper money is not money. It's a substitute for money, all right? It's a promise to pay, a future promise to pay for a present good. How this came about was, very curious story. 1,000 years ago in China, they had metal coins, all right? There was silver, there was gold, but the common people used copper. That was basically the common mechanism of buying and selling in China among the regular people. The kings, I mean the emperor, they had gold and silver, but the common people used copper at the time. Well, in around 1018, 1010, I would say approximately almost exactly 1,000 years ago, in the state of Sichuan, which we know from their hot Chinese food, but in that state at that time, they ran out of copper. All right, there was a shortage of copper coins. So some enterprising guy thought up, well, why don't we mint iron coins instead of copper? All right, because we have a shortage of copper, we'll just mint iron coins, and they're worth less, but you just use more. Well, so they started doing it. The truth of the matter is, iron was worth so much less than copper that it took a whole lot more of copper coins to buy whatever you wanted. For example, to buy 1 pound of salt in Sichuan at the time took 1.5 pounds of iron coins. All right, so it took a huge stack, a heavy stack of iron coins to buy 1 pound of salt. So what people started doing was they started leaving these coins on deposit at money shops, and the money shop would issue them a receipt. So you would walk in to a money shop and you would deposit them your 10 pounds of iron coins, and they'd give you a receipt for 10 pounds of, or however many strings of iron coins this would be, and then you'd go around and you'd exchange this with other people for, you know, food, for whatever you would want. So no, this was the first example of paper being used as money. Now, what did that paper represent? The paper represented the exact amount of iron coins that you had on deposit at a money shop. All right? This worked until the people with the money shop figured out that their little receipts were as good as money. So, I don't know who did it first, but it wasn't just one shop. They would start printing more of these receipts than they had coins for. And eventually, there was more receipts floating around than there was money in these shops. Pretty soon, prices started going up, all right? And it got so bad that economic chaos ensued, and the government was in a state of crisis. There was so much paper, quote, receipts floating around instead of the copper coins, iron coins, that they had to call in the government, the central government, the Sung dynasty at the time, to shut everything down. This is 1022. So in 1022, the central government had to come into the state of Sichuan, and say, okay, you can't do this anymore. And they made a report, and they sent the report back to the central government, what had happened in the state of Sichuan. Well, let me tell you something. The Chinese are a very conservative culture. And I'm using the word conservative in the meaning of change. And we're going to bring this continually through the next two programs. Change is what politics is about. Change, all right? The rate of change, how it changes, how it moves. Now, the Chinese are the most conservative culture on the face of the earth. The Chinese at this time, even art, you had to paint the way the pictures had been done. Nothing was new. They froze everything. So here you had the most conservative culture on the face of the earth, run by a government that didn't want change. And 2 years after they saw what had happened in the state of Sichuan, the Chinese government said, only the central government can issue paper money. Our paper money is now going to become in the realm. All right? Our paper money is going to represent 10 strings of copper coins. At the end of 3 years, you're going to be able to take these receipts, turn it into the government, and get your copper coins back. Or we'll give you a new receipt, and you could use this. So in other words, they were trying to convince the people that their paper money was just like the copper coins that they're replacing. The truth of the matter was, they had a backing of 29%. For every 100 for every 100 pieces of paper, or whatever, 10 pieces of paper, which added up to 100, they only had 29 copper coins in the treasury. So paper money to the Sung dynasty was like hamburger helper. Only the Sung dynasty could issue paper money, and they were able to buy 70% more than they actually had backing for, 71% more. So what it really was it allowed them to stretch, it allowed them to pay for what they didn't have. So this is really how paper money got introduced. It wasn't because of convenience. It was because the Chinese dynasties could use paper money and buy more than they had on hand. Well, what happened is, for the next 500 years, China went on this insane up and down using paper money. The Sung dynasty introduced paper money in the year 10,024. 120 years later, they had collapsed. Economic chaos, just to the bone. They went down, all right? The next dynasty came on, in fact, two of them. One was in the north of China, one was in the south of China. The north one was called the Northern Qin, the other one was Southern Sung. They both used paper money, they both collapsed, all right? The next dynasty came in, wasn't even Chinese, it was the Mongolians. This was Kublai Khan. All right? Kublai Khan came in, they looked at it, they saw that they had 3 dynasties that had collapsed using paper money, but they saw the advantages. So what Kublai Khan did is say, okay, we're going to use paper money, but we're going to back it with gold and silver. All right? Anytime you want to exchange your paper money for gold and silver, you can. We'll convert it instantly, with the caveat of this: you cannot use your gold and silver to buy or sell. Only the Chinese government can. You can only buy and sell in China with these pieces of paper money issued by the Mongol government. So what happened is the government kept all the gold and silver. Everybody else had to use paper money. They collapsed. All right? So in 1641, the succeeding dynasty, 2 dynasties later, outlawed paper money totally together. And China's 500-year experiment with paper money ended. Now, what happened is it reappeared in England in 1694 when William Paterson, the Scotsman, approached King William and said, we can pay, if you let us issue paper money here in England, we're going to pay off all your war debts and loan you more money to fight more wars. So what caused the West to bring in paper money, to bring money no longer based on savings but on debt, was the chance to fight more wars. I want you to remember this. Money is about power. Money is about power. And that's why in the West it first made its appearance, because it allowed governments to go to war. King William was able to now fight wars on credit instead of using costly gold and silver. And as long as he could do that, England could be stable. So with this advantage, England is a dinky little country, all right? At the end of 200 years, England ruled the world. Not the entire world, but when they said the empire never sets on the English, the sun never sets on the English empire, they were right. They had gone entirely around the world. They had knocked over all these different countries. They had imposed their will on these different countries. Why? Because of paper money. Their ability to leverage debt as money itself. Now, when paper money emerged in China 1,000 years before, it was a form of based on gold or silver or copper coins or whatever, which was savings. When it appeared in the West, it wasn't savings anymore because the bankers were the ones who brought paper money in. It wasn't government, it was the banks. And what the banks did, they made the deal with the king, all right? Within 100 years, most of the monarchies were gone, except for England in the West. You now had basically modern bankers and modern governments. And governments were just the mechanism that the bankers used to indebt the population. This is what you have to understand. The last 300 years has been the growth of banking through government vis-a-vis the indebting of the populations. Now, those of you who are listening to this program in 2012, you owe money. You owe maybe a lot of money. You may own a house that you can sell for $1 million, perhaps. But the truth of the matter is, you probably own that house because you owe $1,250,000 on it. You can only sell it for $1 million now. But when you bought the house, you could probably have sold it for maybe $1,250,000, which is why you bought it. But what has happened to you in the last 2 years, you have lost, if you're lucky, $250,000 off the sale price. Most houses are now 30 to 40% below what they were in 2007 or 2008. We have moved into an economy of debt. This is what the insertion of banking into the equation has happened. And banking was a privilege granted to a select group of people who call themselves bankers, who made a deal with the government, first with the King of England, and then later with the United States government, the Federal Reserve, and later with every government on the face of the earth, where central bankers are able to make money out of nothing by virtue of the ability to indebt the people whose money they are issuing. This is a rather amazing device, and especially for the bankers, because by risking nothing of their own, they are able to make money out of nothing and indebt everyone. Now, I know you don't understand this, and the reason isn't because you're dumb. It's because they've lied to you. They don't want you to know this. Why? Because if you knew that bankers were loaning you money back that they borrowed from you in the first place, all right, and with the force of government are enabled to force you to pay back what you owe, not only individually, but collectively, I think no. We're getting ahead of ourselves. It didn't bother you at all, because what you thought initially is that you were getting free money. You didn't know that the bankers were getting free money and charging you interest for your money. You thought, wow, with a bank loan I can buy the house, with a bank loan I can go to school, with a bank loan I can pay my debts, with a bank loan I can have. When I first started writing about money, I wrote an article called Sell Dreams on Credit and Make a Fortune in Interest. Of course, that was to the banks. All right? And I said this is the way the banks do it. All the banks do is they open up a little storefront. Of course, you have to have a license from the government to do so. And if the next day you had $1 million in deposits, somebody else's money, not yours, somebody else's money, had put $1 million in your bank, you could loan money the next day for 10 to 15 million and charge interest on that money, which you got. And as long as the guy who put the $1 million in your bank left it in there, because you were getting interest for it, you were home free. You were home free, loaning out 10 to 15 million dollars based on somebody else's deposit in your bank. Now, this is quite an amazing device. And this is how the whole world has gotten indebted, because governments allow banks to do this. Now, why do governments allow banks to do this? Because governments can borrow that money too from the banks, all right, and spend it as if it is their money. Now, is it their money? No. Because why? How can they spend money that's not theirs? Because the citizens own it. So you collectively, with all your other fellow citizens, are indebted for what your government spends. Originally, King William debts were separate and distinct from the people of England. When King William died, his heirs owed that money, not the people of England. But once the bankers got involved, it didn't take them long to shift the debts of the king to the people themselves. Now, who wanted this? King William wanted it. No longer was he or his heirs responsible for what he spent. And the bankers wanted it too, because the king forced the people to assume his debts. And how did those debts get paid off? With an income tax. Before England fought the Napoleonic Wars, there was no such thing as an income tax anywhere in the world. And when the income tax was first levied on the English people, it was sold as a temporary tax. Well, that's how they sold it. But by the time it came to the United States, by the time the United Americans had the Federal Reserve shoved down their neck in the middle of the night in 1913, they had already passed an act legalizing a federal income tax, which is basically unconstitutional. So now the whole world, first England, then the United States, has this thing. And now we've got debt levied on everybody. All right? So, when we're talking about what the change is happening in 2012, we went back and I showed you how the biggest change in the world had happened in 1694, when all of a sudden the bankers got the franchise of money, and using that franchise allowed government to grow and grow and grow, basically be indebting their people in the process. And now we've got to the point in 2012 where governments all over the world owe so much money they can't pay it back. They can't squeeze their people enough to pay back that debt that is now being owed. And in the next program, I'm going to tell you what is happening here. That whole shift is falling apart. You don't know that either, because they don't want to tell you that the wheels are coming off the car. All right? Now, the truth be told is this. You don't want the wheels to come off the car. You're scared. And of course, you would be scared. But I want to tell you something. Until those wheels come off the car, until the bankers lose their franchise of credit and debt, you are going to be their slave forever. The collapse of the present system is going to be your key to freedom. I want you to understand that. That it has been a 300-year process of where they have enslaved the world through debt with their paper money. But now it's falling apart. That you don't know it because they don't want you to know it. Because if you knew what was going on, if you knew that your freedom was only going to happen at the cost of their collapse, you would want their collapse. But so far you're in the dark. But I want to tell you, it's coming soon. This is what 2012 is all about.